Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
The Daily Compliance News for September 3, 2021, the Texas on the Outs edition. And we begin with that story from the New York Times Deal Book, which says that the state of Texas, which has restricted voting more than any other state in the nation, has run into business and industry groups who've not only spoken out about the move, but now they're trying to do something about it. They're moving their political donations to Washington to try to get a voters' rights bill passed. This attempt at voter repression from the GOP in Texas is simply playing to the MAGA hat-wearing right. And now, of course, the Texas legislature and governor have eviscerated Roe versus Wade. So if you're thinking about moving to Texas, recognize that you are going back literally to the dark ages where women cannot get an abortion if they so choose, and the legislature is going to make it as difficult as possible for your employees to vote. Next up, from CorderyCompliance, a client alert on a recent fine of 225 million euros by the Ireland data protection regulator against WhatsApp for GDPR infringement. This case included a decision by the regulator looking into whether WhatsApp had discharged its GDPR transparency obligations for the provision of information and the transparency of that information both to users and non-users rather, of WhatsApp service. This included information to individuals about the processing of information between WhatsApp and Facebook companies. In addition to their fine, there's a formal reprimand to WhatsApp and 8 remedial actions that WhatsApp has 3 months to apply to. So WhatsApp is ubiquitous outside of the United States, much more than inside the United States, but this is a pretty big sanction by the Ireland Data Protection Commission. Next up, how do you talk about an employee's criminal history? Should you talk about an employee's criminal history? Well, the answer is no, you should not, as reported by Carla Miller in the Washington Post. If you have an employee with criminal background history, then you really shouldn't talk about it to the public at all. And we conclude with Varsity Blues raises its head again as the college admissions scandal will see its first trials begin the first full week in September, with jury selection beginning in a husband and wife trial. To recap, Varsity Blues was where parents either illegally paid test takers to retake their children's test, fraud number 1, and then number 2, where they paid college administrators and coaches to admit their sons in the guise of scholarships, largely around sports, and of course, just straight out bribery to get your kid into college. So, first Varsity Blues cases going to trial. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.